So we can get started. Welcome everybody, and a special welcome to David McAllister, MEP and former Prime Minister of Lower Saxony, who has very kindly agreed to join us for an hour of discussion on the political situation in UK and on Britain and Germany, Britain and Europe, as it presents itself to us at the moment. We have nearly 50 people in on this conference, so everybody, I think, is very keen to hear what your observations and comments are, what your take is on what is happening in Britain at the moment. It was your choice that we do this in English, although, as we all know, you are half British and half German. I'm very careful not to say half English, and that you were or still are a German politician. But of course, we're delighted that you are going to do this in English. With that, over to you. The floor is yours, and we're happy to listen what you have to tell us before we go into Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words, and I'm happy to attend this meeting. Apologies, first of all, for being a few minutes late. It's been a very busy day in the European Parliament today because the European Commission has presented the annual reports on the enlargement countries, and we had a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee which took a little longer than expected because colleagues had so many questions to ask about the situation in Serbia, Montenegro, and Turkey, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and all these other countries. But now I have been asked to share some observation and comments on the relationship between the United Kingdom and Germany and the United Kingdom and Europe, and that all in 15 minutes. I will try to stick first of all to the 15 minutes, and then that we have really time for a good Q&A session. Kind regards from the European Parliament here in Brussels. And as many of you, also we here in Brussels and Strasbourg, over the last few months have witnessed some, I would say, tectonic changes of the world we knew before the 24th of February 2022. And most recently, the passing of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, signaled the ending of an era, not only in the United Kingdom and in the Commonwealth, but across the world. And for many, including myself, Queen Elizabeth was one of the few remaining constants in public life. And in addition, and I read all the articles about her in the last weeks very carefully, she occasionally actually revealed her support for the European Union and for the idea of European integration, referring to Europe as our continent and warning against the danger that a divided Europe could potentially bring with it. And in preparation of this event, I had a look back, and it was actually in May 1992 that Her Majesty addressed the European Parliament's plenary session in Strasbourg. And I would just like to share with you the following quotes. Her Majesty at that time said, quote, "The European Community's institutions were built for reconciliation and to reflect common interest. This is an enterprise which cannot depend upon Europe's efforts alone. It will need the whole free world. But the community's experiences stands as an example of what can be achieved. The community is reinforcing political and economic change throughout Europe through direct help and increased trade. I'm sure that it must do more. I'm confident that it will." And later on in her speech at the end, Queen Elizabeth closed with the following quote. She said, "I shall close by quoting one of Sir Winston Churchill's most distinguished predecessors, Lord Salisbury. In 1888, in a speech in Wales, he said, 'We are a part of the community of Europe, and we must do our duty as such.' 104 years on, I salute the wisdom of those words May God grant the same wisdom to us as we build together our European family, unquote. I just think these are remarkable words Queen Elizabeth found in 1992, 30 years ago in Strasbourg. Now, it's also been long evident that her son, His Majesty King Charles III, inherited this pro-European diplomatic approach. For instance, in 2008, he acknowledged that tackling climate change could not succeed with, I quote, without a strong lead from Europe. So while we begin to continue to forge a new relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union, I believe that we should keep the words of both monarchs in mind. Yes, the enormous challenges we face, we can solve better together. This is the reason why the European Union has always endeavored to have positive relations with the UK, and we will continue to do so. Our future relations need to be based on trust and credibility, which in turn needs to be founded on mutual trust and in respect of the jointly negotiated agreements, the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement. I would like to address 3 points. Very briefly, the future of Anglo-German relations. Second, the fundamental shape of future EU-UK relations and its remaining blank spaces. And third, what are we doing to address the challenges around the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, which in the moment is the biggest challenge for our cooperation. Now, on UK-Germany relations, last year, those of us who were looking for clues on what the change of the federal government in Berlin meant for UK-Germany relations will have found just a short paragraph in the coalition agreement of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals addressing the topic. On page 121, it reads, in the English translation of the German original language, I quote, "The United Kingdom is one of Germany's closest partners outside the EU. A continuing close partnership between the UK and the EU will enable the realization of an ambitious agenda. We would like to cooperate in foreign affairs as well as security policy." So that's what the coalition agreement says on our relations as Germans with the United Kingdom. In my opinion, this statement sent 2 very distinctive messages. First, the German government desires a close and extensive partnership with the United Kingdom. Second, however, this partnership can only realize its potential if UK-EU relations are rebuilt. So, and that's how I would understand the philosophy of our relations with the United Kingdom under the new government in Germany. Our cooperation can only realize its full potential within a close EU-UK relationship. That leads me to my second point. Such a close relationship between the EU and the UK will be built on the withdrawal agreement I already mentioned of February 2020, and the trade and cooperation agreement, as we say in Brussels in jargon, the TCA, which came into provisional force on the 1st of January last year. I was very much involved as chairman of the UK coordination group in the European Parliament, together with Michel Barnier and others, on getting this trade and cooperation agreement done. So in the end, don't be surprised if I say, for me, it's a fair and balanced compromise. The trade and cooperation agreement is certainly unique in its scope and takes our geographic proximity as well as our economic ties into account. And it therefore goes way beyond a traditional trade agreement. And even though this agreement has more than 1,200 pages, and it is by far the most intense cooperation agreement we've ever negotiated, it's still a living agreement. I believe that in future, it can serve as a framework for deepening cooperation, at least on some of the currently missing policies. Yes, the agreement is incomplete. It doesn't extend to some vital policy areas, including foreign and security affairs. And the German coalition agreement I just quoted also refers to this missing space, that we would like to also have a closer cooperation with the British on foreign and security affairs. In 2020, contrary to its original intentions, the UK government finally decided not to negotiate on closer foreign security and defence policy cooperation. Therefore, there hasn't been an institutional framework for questions relating to these topics since January 2021. The United Kingdom is trying to position itself as a global player, and we respect that in Europe, but I sincerely believe that we need to find new ways of mutually beneficial security cooperation, which goes beyond our good cooperation in NATO as allies. What we have seen in recent months was the very coordinated approach of the EU member states and the UK towards Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And it has underlined how important and also powerful our cooperation on foreign security and defense-related issues can be. So I do hope that in the long run, we will still be able to also negotiate an institutional framework how to cooperate with our British partners and friends, also on foreign affairs and security related issues. One thing is clear, and I'm saying that not only as a German citizen who has dual nationality and also is a proud holder of a British passport since I was born, the United Kingdom will remain for us in Germany and in the entire European Union a vital ally within important international fora like the United Nations, like G7, like G20, like the OSCE, and of course, the United Kingdom is a rock-solid NATO ally. Now, my final point is about the situation in Northern Ireland, because that in the moment is really the stumbling block. Fixing the remaining issues in the implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland is a pressing issue, and this requires a viable and timely solution. You are all following British politics very closely, so I don't have to go into detail. The UK government in June introduced the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill for its first reading in the House of Commons. Currently, the bill is before the House of Lords for a second reading. Interesting develops were to be observed in the last 48 hours in the upper chamber. In the House of Lords, members are now pushing to delay the passage of the bill, which we would welcome. And it was on Tuesday, so just yesterday, that peers from both sides submitted 2 amendments criticizing the government's proposals. On the one hand, perhaps less a surprise, the opposition Labour Party says the bill is widely seen as a breach of international law, since the protocol is part of the EU-UK withdrawal agreement, an international treaty ratified by the UK Parliament. But more interesting from my point of view is that also now a Conservative peer, in this case Patrick Cormack, who in the past has chaired the House of Commons Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, presented one of the motions calling for a 6-month postponement to remove the, as he called it, sword of Damocles hanging over the negotiations with the bill. So we will have to wait and see how the ping pong between the Lords and the Commons develops further. But one thing is clear, if in the end the Commons would adopt the UK bill on the Northern Ireland Protocol, it would ensure that certain provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol are no longer in effect with the UK, because the draft of this bill overrides part of the protocol by creating so-called green and red lanes to waive customs controls for products that are only intended for Northern Irish markets. However, it doesn't contain sufficient checks and guarantees to ensure that these goods would, in the end, stay in the UK market. And this, in turn, would mean an unacceptable unilateral breach of an internationally agreed treaty, which would damage the mutual trust we have built over decades. It was Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, who said in July during a debate in the House of Commons, quote, "I have to say to the government that this bill is not, in my view, legal in international law. It will not achieve its aims and it will diminish the standing of the United Kingdom in the eyes of the world. I cannot support it. Well, I don't have much to add. I think the former Prime Minister has put it in the right words. So we in Brussels are concerned about the UK government's move for 3 reasons. The first one, the Northern Ireland Protocol is an integral part of the withdrawal agreement. This is a joint agreement negotiated between the EU and the UK. And without the protocol, I don't believe we would have seen a withdrawal agreement, at least not as it stands. And for us, the protocol is trying to maintain the achievements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement of 1998. Second, the Northern Ireland Protocol is a bilateral treaty to which both parties are bound under international law. Unilateral breaches deliberately contradicting this agreement are simply unacceptable but unlawful. And third, the withdrawal agreement and the associated protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland are the foundation upon which the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was built. So this was a precondition to organize the future relations between the European Union and the UK. So for these reasons, the building I'm just present in now, the European Parliament, has supported the Commission's decisions of the 22nd of July to relaunch infringement procedures against the UK. These infringement procedures aim to achieve compliance with the Northern Ireland Protocol in vital areas. We believe Northern Ireland must continue to benefit from its privileged access to the European single market, but in addition, we need to ensure the integrity of our single market, as well as the health, safety, and security of EU citizens. So to sum up in simple words, the protocol is not the problem. The problem is Brexit, and the protocol is part of the solution of the problem. And it's especially part of the solution of the problem that the UK government decided to pick a very hard form of Brexit that took the country also out of the EU single market and the customs union. I'm in close contact with Maroš Šefčovič, who is the chief negotiator on the EU side, and we're happy that talks are starting to resume again after the new Prime Minister and the new Foreign Minister are in office. I believe that solutions exist to address the difficulties of the implementation of the protocol. We as European Union have shown great flexibility to work on the UK government to solve these problems, but what we now need is genuine and constructive engagement from the UK side. It's a positive sign that the talks between the EU and the UK officials have resumed last Thursday. First reports state that the timetable foresees month-long instead of week-long negotiations. Officials from both sides are said to work on a different theme or set of themes each week and then build them towards progress. These talks are likely to include customs, agri-food checks, governance, and other issues. Furthermore, it is likely that the UK side will bring up the issue of the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, and its jurisdiction in the UK. So I'll leave it there. To conclude, the UK is the 5th strongest economy in the world and part of the European continent. It remains one of the EU's closest natural partners. We share principles, we share core values, we are allies in the international context, but we have a few things to solve as regards the nitty-gritty of the implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement. We have now, since Brexit, experienced 3 prime ministers, first Theresa May, then Boris Johnson, and now Liz Truss. Every one of them brought their own priorities and their own negotiating style to the table, not seldom reversing parts of previous government policy. This has sometimes made constructive negotiations a little more difficult, but what is important, and that's my final sentence, people and businesses in Europe and in the UK, and in particular in Northern Ireland, need long-term stability. And it is our common responsibility to assure that this stability can be produced in all its aspects as soon as possible. Thanks for listening. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. First of all, I hope you don't mind if I use English customs of addressing you as David. as we're
no problem at all.
talking English. Thank you very much, David, for this introduction, which of course has really pointed to the both sort of general picture and to some very, very concrete issues that are at stake. And I'm sure there are lots of questions in all your minds. Please just try and put them in the chat room so we can take them on. My first question, before we probably move to the Northern Ireland Protocol fairly quickly, but my first question would be to do with your second point. What do you think the UK will do about what happened in Prague last week? The sort of new kind of format for European relations. We all sort of witnessed that UK government was quite hesitant to join this conference. In the end, they did join. They insisted that no EU flags should be shown anywhere near the venue. So it was all a bit sort of strange to some extent. Would you say UK is now committed to this new format, or is that still sort of up for discussion?
I thought the European political community's first meeting in Prague was a success. And it went better than perhaps many of us expected. This was mainly due to the Czechs organizing it in a very good fashion. I mean, this European political community was an idea, more or less, it came up with the French president, Emmanuel Macron. And then the Czechs did a real good show in Prague. And just yesterday, we were sitting together in Brussels in a small round with the Commission president. And what we in Europe need to understand is the 27 heads of state and government in the EU see each other on a regular basis. But there were 17 other ladies and gentlemen who don't see each other among themselves and also together with the 27 EU. But on the other hand, the problems, the challenges we are facing are so interconnected that it makes sense, first of all, that we have found a platform where 44 women and men sit around the table. I mean, the whole of Europe has been invited, apart from two, the dictators of the Russian Federation and Belarus. So that was important, that the leaders not only discussed security and defense, but also, of course, the pressing issue of energy. So it's good that it started. And Rupert, we also managed to produce at least some concrete results. The one, there will be an EU-led monitoring mission on the borders between Azerbaijan and Armenia. That was an important concrete result. And the other one was, it was good that the UK Prime Minister actually went to Prague, and that Ms. Truss and Monsieur Macron have now agreed that there will be a UK-France bilateral summit to urgently discuss some of the very pressing issues in the Channel, among others. So concrete results. You asked me, will this format be a success? Well, it depends. If this format turns into another talking shop, then in the long run, I don't think this will be a success. But if the next meeting, which, and that is a wise decision, will not take place in an EU country, but in a third country, in this case, Moldova, if the second meeting is also a success, and then the third meeting again, I think will take place in Spain, then I think we might have a format where every 6 months, apart from the EU, such important partners like Norway, UK, Switzerland, our Western Balkan countries, the Turks, Moldova, and others get together. It's good that the UK Prime Minister attended the meeting, and obviously the British have found an interest in this because they're going to host the 4th meeting. So obviously there's some British commitment. And if in the end, the price is that EU flags are not allowed to be seen anywhere near where the UK Prime Minister is? Well, I would say I would prefer to see European flags. I'm always happy to see the 12 golden stars on a blue background. But if that's the price we as Europeans have to pay for the UK Prime Minister to attend, then I think this is a price we can still pay. So I do hope that a UK Prime Minister will remain engaged in this format. A final point, because I mentioned at the beginning today that this has been a busy day in Brussels because of the enlargement reports which have been presented. We have to be very clear. The European political community is something totally different than countries wanting to join the European Union. So you can be an active member of the European political community, but you can still try to achieve EU membership. This is an important message we had to say to our friends in the Western Balkans, because at the beginning, they kind of had the impression, oh, is this European political community going to be a kind of a waiting room for those who might take years to join the European Union?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take a couple of questions from the chat room, and I'll read what Tina Jones wrote. Given that the current PM and Chancellor seem to be totally clueless as to the impacts that their actions would take, do you really think that any progress can be made with regard to the Brexit negotiations? And can you really trust such people? And she continues with two more, and I'll just add them on here. Do you think that Scotland will one day rejoin the EU as an independent country? And do you think that Northern Ireland will, in the next decade, rejoin the Republic of Ireland? So that's quite a handful.
Okay, oh, tricky questions. The first one is the European Commission is negotiating with the UK government on behalf of our 27 member states all the details of the implementation of the protocol in Ireland and Northern Ireland. I have been very outspoken that this UK bill on the protocol hasn't been helpful at all, and we need to get rid of this bill so we can negotiate in good faith. Once again, I've been to Northern Ireland twice in the last 2 years. I have met many meetings with politicians, with business representatives, with representatives of civil society. For most of the people I spoke to in Northern Ireland, I didn't have the impression that the protocol as such is the problem, but people want the problems stemming from Brexit, and especially the hard form of Brexit, to be solved. And we believe that scrapping the protocol would be totally counterproductive. The protocol is part of the solution of the problem, and we have shown as EU so much flexibility and pragmatism to get things done that we would like to see a similar goodwill on the UK side. When Liz Truss became Foreign Minister, there was a short phase where we had the impression that Mr. Šefčovič and Ms. Truss really got on well and that we were moving things forward. But then, for whatever reasons, she shifted her approach and things got worse. Now we have a new Foreign Secretary, and let's see what James Cleverly and his team will actually present. The best thing would be, first of all, get this the bill in the House of Commons out of the way, and let's work on the concrete items in Northern Ireland. The goodwill is there, at least from our side. On Scotland, I have a Scottish background, I have Scottish family, and I have understood one thing: life's too short for a German politician to get involved in the independence debate of Scotland. I know people who are in favor of independence. I know people who are very much in favor of remaining in the Union. And I also know people in Scotland who are simply a little tired of this year-long debate. I am not going to get dragged into this. People are trying to get me dragged into this since 2014, and I will still resist doing this tonight. In the end, the question if Scotland could become an independent country is a political question which has to be answered in Scotland, and it has to be discussed in a format where Edinburgh and London will need to find a solution which both sides can accept. And in the meantime, for us, Scotland is a vital part of the United Kingdom. Should, in theory, Scotland become an independent country, well, then they could apply for EU membership like any other independent country in Europe, according to the rules of Article 49. But that is, of course, future matters which we in Brussels don't have much appetite in answering now. But in theory, an independent Scotland could apply for EU membership. And on Northern Ireland, well, the Good Friday Belfast Agreement sees the possibility of holding a referendum, but in the moment, most of the political parties in Northern Ireland are very quiet on this matter. The future of Northern Ireland will also be decided by the people of Northern Ireland and the people in Northern Ireland. And in the moment, Northern Ireland is a vital part of the United Kingdom. The Republic of Ireland is an EU member state. And what we're trying to do is, under all circumstances, avoid any kind of hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland. And that's why we agreed to a rather difficult construct called the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, which in the end was trying to square the circle. And why were we trying to square the circle? Because the UK government had three political goals. The first one is to leave the European Union, the single market and the customs union. The second goal was, under all circumstances, to avoid any kind of hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And the third goal was not to in any kind of way interfere in the within the unity of the United Kingdom. But if you want to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and if you want frictionless trade for goods between Northern Ireland and Ireland, you will have to have a minimum of checks and controls, theoretically in the Irish Sea. So we make sure that goods that are going from Britain to Northern Ireland are actually only dedicated for the Northern Ireland market, because we have the obligation to protect the single market with its high standards, not only for the citizens in Ireland, but also for the citizens of the rest of the European Union, including in Germany. So the whole idea of the protocol was to square the circle, what we tried, and the original idea of the protocol was a British proposal, and that's why we considered being rather unfair that it was the British who came up with this idea, and now it's the same British side who are saying, but we simply don't want to implement what we originally proposed and jointly negotiated with the European Union. So that's why there are sometimes slightly hard feelings in this part of Europe, here in Brussels, towards some activities of the UK government.
Thank you. Let's just stay with that for a moment. There's another message in the chat, and it says, what's your assessment of Liz Truss regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol, since she has so far taken a very hardline approach? And do you find that Steve Baker, ex-chair of the ERG group, is now taking a more conciliatory approach in his new role as Northern Ireland Minister?
Well, it's simply, we will have to wait and see how things develop. One thing is clear, I think Liz Truss and others have shown that they can be real hardliners on this matter. It was mainly Ms. Truss who was responsible for the tabling of the UK bill on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it was her party and her parliamentary group who voted in favor of this bill in the Commons. Now we are seeing some discussions in the Lords, and for a good reason. I didn't only quote the perhaps rather obvious Labour amendment, but also about some Conservative peers obviously have some doubts about this bill. So we'll have to see and wait and see what the ping pong between the Commons and the Lords will actually bring. If this bill is adopted, then the EU will be forced to retaliate. And what I find so saddening is, I mean, if you look at the world in the moment, don't you believe that there are other issues we should be dealing with than tit for tat, because the British side simply is not willing to implement what it has jointly agreed with us? Steve Baker and others, well, perhaps it might take some hardliners to argue that in the end, we're just trying to find pragmatic, flexible solutions for businesses and people in Northern Ireland. Maroš Šefčovič has been to Northern Ireland so often, listened carefully to what the business community especially told him. And I can only tell everyone who's engaged in this matter, speak to businesses in Northern Ireland. They are interested in pragmatic solutions. Some of the politicians in Northern Ireland see this more as an ideological question. But we as a European Union have also been very clear. We under no circumstances want to get dragged into Northern Irish domestic politics. The debates between the DUP and Sinn Féin, between the loyalists on the one side and the unionists on the one side and the nationalist Republicans on the other side, we do not want to get dragged into this. We are strictly neutral when it comes to Northern Ireland. We are not a player in Northern Irish politics. We just want to maintain the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. So, as the Germans say, die Hoffnung stirbt zuletzt. And let's wait and see what happens. It's a good sign that at least we are starting to talk to each other again. And as long as we're talking, I still have hope that we can get things solved.
Right. Let's hope you're right. In the end, the thing about Liz Truss is that she's changed her mind quite often on all kinds of issues. So perhaps she can change her mind on this one too. But it will be a sort of climb down of some kind. I mean, they've been so eager to have this bill that the only solution one can foresee is that she climbs down and says we'll table it or we'll postpone it or something, and then but it's going to be a very difficult bit of political maneuvering, I would think. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, but to postpone the bill is only the first step. I mean, it just, you know, as a diplomat here in Brussels once said, it's not very nice negotiating something if the pistol's on the table, including formation. So the sword of Damocles needs to be removed. And we call on the UK side, look, we are ready to find pragmatic solutions, but please don't work on legislation which would simply override essential parts of the protocol. That's not the way to move forward. So that's one point. And then I just read in the comments that Lord Frost that has ruled out any kind of, say, the ECJ in Northern Ireland. Look, Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom, and the sovereignty of Northern Ireland is totally in the hands of the United Kingdom. The ECJ is, however, the last instance to clarify and to solve questions around the single market. And as long as Northern Ireland, as long as goods from Northern Ireland have free access to the single market rules which apply for goods will also have to apply in Northern Ireland. Well, that's a question of common sense. And as long as we don't have any problems with applying these rules in Northern Ireland, there will be no rule for the ECJ. But in the case, there will be at some stage some legal matters to be solved. The ECJ is the ruling court of the single market. And we in the single market, in Germany, in France, in Portugal, in Greece, in Finland, we all depend on one thing, that the rules of the single market apply in all member states of the single market, But in the end, there's one final legal arbiter which decides these conflicts, and this has to be the European Court of Justice. So I think we can, if the UK side wants us to make this clear in additional declarations, whatever, I think we will be able to find flexible solutions. But you cannot have, on the one hand, the advantage of being so deeply interconnected with the world's largest single market, and the other hand, not be ready to 100% to actually follow the rules of the single market. Last point, I've been to Northern Ireland twice. I've walked around Belfast. I've spoken to so many different people. If you speak to the average businesswoman or businessman in Belfast, if you speak to the average citizens in Northern Ireland, not a single person in Belfast ever told me that the role of the role of the European Court of Justice would cause him or her not to sleep at night. I sometimes have the impression that ECJ-related matters play a bigger role for people in London than in Belfast.
Now, it hasn't been sort of very widely advocated, but there has been a suggestion to introduce a sort of voluntary arbitration system on the lines that were discussed in the TTIP agreement that never came about, and things like that. Is there any chance that this might be a solution rather than ECJ?
Well, I'm very cautious to comment further here. We're at the beginning of negotiations. In the end, we're ready to find pragmatic solutions. But look, we have member states in the single market who are not members of the European Union. Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and they to 100% accept the single market acquis and also the ruling of the European Court of Justice, because they say, yes, on the one hand, we don't have a say, but on the other hand, the benefits are so big of our countries being a fully fledged part of the single market, we're happy with this. Now, the situation in Northern Ireland is different. Northern Ireland is not part of the single market. What we have agreed upon is that the rules of the single market must apply for goods that are going from Northern Ireland to the Republic, and the other way around, to avoid a hard border. And that is, on the one hand, of course, a challenge for Northern Ireland, but on the other hand, it's a huge benefit, because Northern Ireland has the huge advantage of the one hand being a fully fledged part of the UK's internal market, and on the other hand, at least for goods, being a fully fledged part of the European single market. And that is a big advantage. And more businesses, at least I understand this in Northern Ireland, are seeing the huge benefits they have on the north-south trade-related issues and the east-west. And what we have to get done is to improve how west-east, east-west, Britain, Northern Ireland, Britain trade flows are functioning. But I don't think this has a lot to do with any kind of ECJ rulings. And Rupert, speak to those people who are on the ground in Northern Ireland. I think they don't really have a problem with the ECJ in the end being the final arbiter.
Just one more on this one. It says the House of Lords, as an unelected chamber, traditionally never blocks a bill. It will only try to amend or delay it. What makes you think it will be different this time? And also, Theresa May will not vote against the bill in the end, will she?
Well, first of all, even if Theresa May voted against the bill, I think at the moment the Conservatives have slightly more than a one-seat majority. So in the end, of course, it's in the hands of the Conservative Party. I can only call on the members of the House of Commons. Listen carefully to what the Lords have to say. And if there's cross-party second thoughts in the House of Lords about this legislation, perhaps the Lords might simply have a point there. So in the moment, we're going to face ping pong. In the end, of course, the Commons could also always overrule decisions taken by the House of Lords, and I'm sure they would probably do so. However, and we're just calling on our British colleagues in the House of Commons, please think about the consequences this would have, because then the European Union would be forced to take measures against the British side. Infringement procedures would be started and finalized, and it would create so much mess. And if you look at the economic situation in the United Kingdom, I just don't really believe it would be a wise idea to open up another front on fights for the European Union. Yeah. So it's in the hand of the Conservative Party, and I do hope that Conservative MPs will also listen to what their citizens are telling them. And if I follow the polls carefully in the United Kingdom, I think a majority of British people are perhaps of the opinion that in the moment we are facing other, more urgent problems, from the war in Ukraine over inflation and energy prices to climate change.
Let's just turn to Germany for a moment. And there's a comment here that says, you mentioned trust building, which is needed on both sides. Shouldn't Germany play a more active role here by offering some bilateral cooperation so as to create trust?
Well, on the one hand, there are lots of fields of bilateral cooperation, and I would say that despite the UK government and the current German government being in very different political camps, there's good cooperation, and I'm very sure that Olaf Scholz and Liz Truss, just like all the ministers, will have personal and political relations, and that's important. And we should continue. We just need to be careful when it comes to foreign policy, security and defense related matters I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. In London, of course, there's an appetite to have close relations with Paris, close relations with Berlin, perhaps even have a triangle format, London, Paris, Berlin, which is totally understandable from the British point of view. And there will be some cases where this format will make sense, because in the end, the three countries I mentioned are also the three leading military powers in Europe. But for us, as the coalition treaty I quoted says in the beginning, and if I, as a German Christian Democrat, am happy to quote a coalition agreement I never negotiated and my party never signed, it shows you that I'm really perhaps rather credible on this matter. I believe that the wording of the coalition treatment at this point is a very wise one, that we in Germany want to improve our relations with the UK, that we want to have good bilateral relations, that we want a close and extensive partnership, as it says, but that this partnership will only realize its full potential if UK and EU relations are rebuilt. So we call on our British friends, we're ready to have an excellent bilateral relationship, but let's fix also the difficulties we have with the EU. And the German government under Angela Merkel, just as now under Olaf Scholz, has played a very constructive role in the ongoing negotiations with the UK on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. To quote our former Chancellor, my Chancellor Angela Merkel always said, the most important country in assessing the situation in Northern Ireland is the Republic, because they're the closest. And they know the British best, and they will know best how to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland and to maintain all the great achievements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. So I think Germany has played a constructive role, and I'm very sure that this will continue, and Olaf Scholz in the former government of Angela Merkel backed an ambitious approach towards UK-German relations, and I'm sure that he will continue to do so now that he's Chancellor.
Great. Final question, and here we move into the realm of speculation and possibly fantasy, but still, all the problems would be solved by return of Britain to the EU. I know from many friends in England, the commentator says, I know from many friends in England that they think that way. Do you see any opportunity, though on a very far horizon, that such a return might be possible?
Well, to quote Donald Tusk, who was president of the European Council in the last term, Donald Tusk said, our door will always remain open. And he was fully correct with that statement. Our door will always remain open for our British partners and friends. But should the UK at one day decide to rejoin the European Union, we might have to sit down and have a very thorough discussion what it actually means to be a member of the European Union. And being a member of the European Union brings you a wide range of rights, but it comes also with some obligations. And cherry picking, which we allowed for many years and decades, or as we in the German language say, Rosinenpicken, we pick raisins, the English pick cherries. I don't think there's much appetite to allow this to happen again. So if you want to join the European Union, you have to be very clear what this means, having rights and obligations. And it would secondly mean we need a very serious commitment of a different UK government to actually join. That means that we would probably want to see at least twice a government with a pro-European agenda actually being re-elected. Because what we cannot do in Europe is that the UK joins the European Union, leaves the European Union, joins the European Union, leaves the European Union after every one or other election. So it would have to be a really serious commitment. But the door remains open, and I will never give up hope that one day the United Kingdom will rejoin our family of nations. For me, Brexit was a historic mistake, one of the most stupid political decisions I have witnessed in my political lifetime. I'm a Democrat. I respect the sovereign decision of the British government to leave the European Union and the British Parliament, but still, I'm very outspoken on this. The UK would be stronger and better off in the European Union, and they were, for more than 45 years, an important member of our family of nations, not always the most easy member, to put it in very mild terms. But I can tell you, since 2020, I miss my British colleagues every day in the European Parliament, especially because of their sense of humor and their wit, and also their pragmatism. And Rupert, one of the biggest success stories of the European Union was the single market. And the single market was, to a large degree, a British project, a British idea. It was British commissioners and British MEPs who brought the single market forward. Or on trade, that the European Union is a global power on trade has a lot to do with very engaged British commissioners and MEPs across the party lines in this European Parliament in Brussels and Strasbourg. And that's why it was so sad to see the British leave the single market and the customs union, which without their engagement, we probably wouldn't have had, at least not in the way it exists today.
Yes, just to comment very, very briefly on what you've just been saying. I've had quite a lot to do with the Commission over many years, and I've always found dealing with people in the commission who were from Britain was usually particularly easy because they were pragmatists, they knew what they were talking about, and so it made the relationship a very sort of good one and easy one. So we end on a note of hope that perhaps one day, and the younger ones may actually see the day, Britain will rejoin. At the moment, we'll have to face the issues we've been discussing. Thank you very much indeed, David, for giving us your views. And I think it's been a really interesting and rewarding to discuss them with you. Thanks a lot. Good luck to you in this next period, and I hope we'll probably see each other on some other British occasion. Thank you all for listening. We've had well over 50 people in on this conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you again next time.